Hello everyone, how is it going? So here we are, me and Elliott on our first real talk together, just me and him. We're going to talk about how we can relate to each other on our journey, both being from the UK, both having much things in common, and also our lowest moments and how we can relate to that, but also how we can pull ourselves out of that and what we had to do to push ourselves through, especially, because me and Elliott can relate to like socializing and going to football. Like I said, we've got many things in common. So how we still manage to live life, even with OCD being there, even when we were at rock bottom, and how we just managed to pull ourselves through and keep up that socializing, keep up that structure. It was
Yeah,
bloody difficult for sure, as we'll get into, but
yeah,
how we managed to do that and how it's so important to keep up a good structure and keep up the interests and passions no matter what you're into, no matter what hobbies you're into or what culture you're in, how you can still maintain that even whilst going through the recovery journey.
yes.
So, Elliot, if I can ask you, when you first came in or when you first started on the journey, what did you find most difficult about keeping up your interests, your hobbies, the things that you love doing today? How did that take a hit with OCD?
Yeah, so obviously with OCD and I had chronic HOCD. I felt, feelings of shame, feeling that I was living a lie and I didn't want to like expose myself to the world. I didn't want to be around other people because I didn't want them to pick up on like me being this potential person who's living a lie. Like, in football,
Yeah,
like you said, Sam, there's a big sort of, masculine element,
yeah,
guys, being one of the lads. And like, I thought, if I do that and get around like my football friends and, the people that I go watch football with, and if only they knew, they're going to
yeah,
judge
yeah,
me and have shame,
big one.
feelings of shame towards me, feelings of rejection.
Yeah,
So there was a lot of that going on, and you're just monitoring yourself like a hawk, especially
yeah,
me with HOCD. Did I say this in the right way? Did I sound gay then? Did I look at that guy for too
yeah,
long? And that's all we can think about. And trying to be at football matches or whatever it was, going to the gym, there's all of that
yeah,
going on. You're just not really absorbed in what you're doing. You're so inward, aren't you? It's misted glass,
yeah,
all you're worried about. So firstly, I avoided it. I spent lots of time just being at home in my room doing compulsions, not really going out. But I knew that, I had to just take that step even when I didn't feel like it and wear all those feelings of shame and, feelings of rejection and, all that confusion. So it was really hard. It might have been similar for you with POCD as well. I
yeah.
imagine.
It certainly was the avoidance. I couldn't even sort of look at people in the face because
Yeah,
when I started relevant false memory, I'd be chatting to friends down the pub, and I'd be engaged in the conversation, but it was just that constant sort of vacant look.
yeah,
We both can relate to that 1,000 yard stare, sort of
yeah,
looking through misted glass, isn't it? Where you're physically there, but you're just looking through people, going over something in my head. And I thought I was doing a relevant false memory because I was just living in the past trying to get certainty on something before I could sort of fully invest in the conversation, before I could fully invest in the interest. Like, because I used to say things like, or the belief was, I can't fully enjoy this if this thing happened in the past,
yeah,
right? So I'll be at a football match, I'd be down the pub, I'd be on holiday with mates, and it'd be like, yeah, but you can't fully get involved in this, Sam, because of this thing in the past. So what I then used to do, I'm sure you can relate to this, Elliot. I try and get certainty, like in the build up, right? Complete dead end, right? Path to nowhere. You're not going to suddenly get certainty on something that happened in the past, especially when the pressure's on, right?
no,
Because it was like the deadline was there. Shit, you've got a flight tomorrow morning. You need to get it sorted out. And then that built in fear of fear because I then dreaded the holiday. I was like, shit, once I go on holiday, and then I just crumble and can't cope and have to come home. And then
yeah,
that happened at times where I remember once being in the Isle of Wight, bit of a strange place to go to with friends, but we were there and I was just in tears. I felt like, how do I function here? And
yeah,
that was because I made it worse by trying to get it all figured out. And obviously I couldn't because every time I tried to figure out, OCD moved the goalposts, and then you've got the old co involved, you've got everything else involved as well. So that was a big one for me. Now I knew I was making progress, or to make progress, I had to just not avoid at all costs.
yeah,
Because at my worst, I just didn't even do these things. I remember once making up excuses, like saying, "Oh, I'm not feeling too great. Oh, I've got like a headache," right?
yeah,
Because even just the build up would just fill me with dread. Like, let's say you had a big match coming up in football, and it's like, well, you're not going to enjoy it, Sam. So already I was thinking of excuses and not going. Like, it's
yeah,
terribly sad looking back now because I love going to football. I love that kind of thing now. But back then it was just, yeah, I think it's just like a chore. It's just going to be a whole day of anxiety. And if only they knew. And that was the trouble because I was trying to work out before. I couldn't get that. It just felt like I just wasn't moving anywhere.
Yeah.
So how did you, Elliot, pull yourself out of that avoidance? If somebody came to you and said, hey, I want to do all these things, I want to keep it all up, but I keep avoiding it, what would you tell them?
The thing is, like, you're never going to feel in the right headspace to do that, right? You have to
Yeah,
just take a leap. Like, it's like saying if I've got a fear of rejection and I don't want to do my shame attacks, right? There's never going to feel a good time to do them.
yeah,
You just have to go right through the fire, whether you like it or not. Because if you're waiting for the right time, you're going to be waiting forever. You might feel even worse the next day. So it's so
yeah,
important just to take action, and we can't underestimate the importance of that. It's like with life structure, right? We don't say about it for no reason. If you're waiting to feel the right way before you live your life, it's adding another layer of fear onto your OCD because you're saying, I can't do X, Y, Z until I've recovered. And
yeah,
subconsciously, like if you're watching yourself on like a TV screen, which is an analogy I like to use, that's not going to be conducive to recovery. You know,
yeah,
it's so important to be actually engaging with the world, even when you feel like shit, because it
yeah,
eventually, over time, whilst you work on your beliefs, you show the brain that you can still operate, and it just brings down that fear layer. But yeah, to answer your question, Sam, like, it's about taking leaps and just going through the fire. It's accepting, holding your hands up and saying, look, I'm not going to feel great for the time being. I can't sit in my room and do nothing because time's just going to pass me by. I've got a finite
yeah,
amount of time on this earth. I can either spend it within the confines of my house. Yes, I do have a serious mental health disorder, or I can really grab the ball by the horns and try and just, engineer this life for myself by,
yeah.
taking the leaps, because that's all
I-
you can do. It's never going to
it-
feel right, which is hard to
that's
hear.
exactly, and that's so, so important because what I see quite a lot, and I see it in coaching calls, and I did it myself, it was waiting until I was recovered to live
Mm,
life. And that is the last thing that you should be doing, right? You have got to implement the recovery work whilst living, right? You can't just put everything on hold. You can't just drop everything and go, I need to recover before I do this.
yeah,
Because the trouble is, you'd be waiting a lifetime. Like you could be on your deathbed. The sad reality, you could be on your deathbed waiting to recover, right? So you
mm,
have to learn and learn to accept that you may never recover. Now you don't want to hear that, right? But life structure can be worked on immediately. Whereas, so you're thinking, well, even if I don't recover, I can get my life structure in a great place. And then, as you're doing the belief work, as you're cutting the compulsions, as you're doing your exposures, as you're working on your structure, recovery can just happen as a side effect of that in time and
yeah,
patience and persistence with that. But you can't go, right, I'm going to forget all my hobbies, I'm going to get everything that I like doing to recover. Right.
mhm,
And I know it sounds quite extreme saying that, but I do genuinely see that. I see people not really taking the risk, not really going for like a job promotion, not really working on their studies or focusing on their career because they're desperate to recover. And I like that they're prioritizing recovery, but you can't just make it everything
no,
because OCD knows exactly that, doesn't it? It
yeah,
digs its heels in then.
yeah,
You can't just sit around and wait for it. And also, you got to think, well, if OCD wasn't even a thing, right? And you're looking on your deathbed, right? Let's say you're about to die tomorrow. You're not going to be looking back going, oh, I felt so shit on the 22nd of June 2031. You're not going to be saying that, are you? Right? You'd
no,
be thinking about what you did, no matter if OCD was there or not. Okay, and that always helped me thinking, well, if I avoid this football match, why do I want to do that? I might be feeling shit, but ultimately I'll be sat at home feeling shit,
yeah,
right? So you can't put life on hold and imagine life, imagine you've got a year left to live, for example. You're not going to be thinking, oh, I felt so shit on that day. You'll be thinking about what you did, your experiences, who you met, who you spoke to, and the memories, wouldn't you? You're not be thinking, oh, I had this trigger at 9:21 a.m. You won't be thinking like that. That's always an important one to remember, I think.
yeah, absolutely. And I think it's one of those situations where you fear more, basically you fear more actually, going back to work than the fear of it itself. So once like you actually there, you find out that
Yeah.
being there is not actually as bad as the fear you had of it, if you know what I mean. So
Yeah.
we fear like all the situations because we think, oh,
Yeah,
it's going to exacerbate our symptoms, but when you're actually in that moment, it's actually not as bad as what you think, not
yeah,
from a reassurance standpoint, but it's just a factor of it. Like we play it up in our mind to be worse than it actually is. And like,
yeah,
I had some of my best times in my life with chronic OCD. I went to university, I played football there, I met some of my best friends, sort of dating, that sort of thing. And I had some really good times. So you're actually
Anyway,
missing.
I just want to ask you on that. Did you have, because people can relate to this so much, can you, or did you have the fear of rejection from like panicking? So not just not HOCD related, but just what happens if I panic? What happens if I'm anxious? Like, did you have the fear of them judging you for that, for example?
Yeah, I did. There was an element of that in there. But yeah, for me mainly it was the actual fear of rejection of HOCD and that sort of
Yeah,
thing. It does.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I did have an element of that, but probably not as strong as a HOCD. I don't know about you.
Yeah, well, I remember at times thinking if I run off to the bathroom and cry,
Yeah.
right? And I remember doing this once, 2018. I think I've said this before in a voice note in the groups that 2018, I think I was in a club in Bristol, and I said to my mates, I just said I can't do this anymore, and it all came flooding out. And then the next day I was thinking, oh, they're going to judge me for having like a mental health disorder. They're
Yeah.
going to judge me for having OCD. So that became another layer on top. Like, oh, what's
Mhm.
the stigma around mental health? What do they just think is a load of crap? So I had that. So every time I then went out with friends again, it was like, they're just going to see me differently now. And I
Yeah.
can't stand the fact they're going to see Sam with the mental health disorder, Sam
Yeah.
with OCD, the weird guy Sam, because that was what was going through my mind.
Yeah.
Right. So that was another barrier for me.
Yeah, I think one of the regrets I have actually, Sam, is not actually telling my friends earlier that I was going through this, because it can actually be like a really good exposure to tell your friends and family that you're suffering from HOCD. And yes, I'm not saying it's easy just to tell people about taboo themes, especially with POCD, but I think where possible, it is a very good exposure to tell people what you're going through, like within reason, because with me, like it just reinforced how scared I was of like the HOCD, because I didn't want to tell people about it because I had so much shame over it. And that sort of subconsciously kept the cycle going. It's like, oh, it's too scary to tell people. And it just kept me locked. So that's one of my regrets actually, that I didn't tell people sooner. But I know there's obviously taboo things which are hard, but I think where
Yeah.
possible, it's good to tell people about it as soon as you
Yeah.
can. I don't know if
and
you're the same.
and that's funny because with me I had to balance that with confession, right? So I had to rein that in. So I had to stop that because
Yeah.
that's all I was doing. I was telling people to get sort of relief. Do they still like me? Do they still approve of me? Am I confessing? Because I was just getting it all off my chest. So
Mm,
with me that became a problem. But you've also got to remember that others don't have to understand OCD and they won't, right? They don't
yeah.
need to understand OCD because how can they, right? How can somebody understand obsessive compulsive disorder, all the ins and outs of it, all the nuances of it, right? So, and a good exposure for me was I used to get really pissed off when people used to mock OCD.
Mm,
They'd be like, they'd have like all their pens lined up on the desk and they'd be saying, oh, I'm so OCD. Like,
yeah.
oh, I've got OCD. So because that used to really annoy me when I was suffering. I was like, for fuck's sake, if only you knew what OCD suffering was like.
Mm,
So I remember doing this many times as an exposure. I would sort of join in on that. I'd be like, oh yeah, I've got my pens lined up as well. I'm so OCD, right? Just to sort of put myself in that position that, hey, Sam, people aren't going to understand you.
yeah.
And so that really helped me overcome that fear that nobody needed to understand my OCD, right?
Yeah.
And you feel so alone, you feel so isolated, hence why the groups have been invented, hence why, in the OCD community, because you can see that you're really, really not alone. But you've always got to remember that no matter what, even somebody who's in your family caring for you, maybe they're helping you with sessions, maybe they're supporting you, they're never going to truly understand it because they don't have it. So that's a big part of it. And that was a huge part for me. I remember looking around at a football match going, fuck, like none of these people just understand what I'm going through right now. Like I can
Yeah.
tell that person over there that I'm dealing with anxiety, needs to probably just say, man up, get on with it.
Yeah.
Right. So always remember that OCD is very misunderstood. It's come a long way. You can't just expect people to understand what you're going through.
No, no. And I think as well with OCD, like to the average person looking in, if there was another person here and they looked at me and you, aesthetically, they probably wouldn't be able to tell we've got OCD, right? Because
No.
we're sort of, I don't know, quote unquote normal lads who have got, interests,
Yeah.
these, whatever. So an outsider looking in, they might just think you're just like a normal person, so to speak. Like I'm not
Yeah.
saying that in a derogatory way, just someone without OCD. And that's the
Yeah.
hard thing with OCD, because inside you're actually, you're fighting a well, you're fighting a really hard battle, and people can't see that. So they sort of take you as like this person who doesn't have any sort of handicap, right? And with that element, they don't understand it, which, like you said, it's important that we don't demand people understand us. But I think that makes it quite hard for OCD sufferers, because people just think, oh, there's nothing wrong
Yeah.
with you, you're fine. It's not like a visible illness like having a broken leg or, some other sort
Mhm.
of mental
Yeah.
handicap. it's actually like an invisible illness, I'd say, you know.
Yeah.
Um,
And if you're watching this video and you get to reach out for help, there's no shame in suffering from OCD,
no,
right? There's no stigma in it. And it can be hard because, like Elliot was saying then, when I first started saying to people that I was suffering with mental health, like I said, I had to cut this out because it became confession. But when I first reached out for help, I was sort of, it was like a desperate cry for help. I was saying to people like, hey, I'm struggling. And is understanding that, hey, although it can feel like it was a weakness, I used to see it as that. I used to see it as a weakness. I
yeah,
used to say, oh, I can't reach out for help. This is embarrassing. I should get through this by myself. But if you are really struggling, that first step for you is just reaching out and go, hey, look, I'm struggling here.
yeah,
Right? OCD doesn't give a shit who you are. Like, if you've got OCD, it doesn't discriminate. It's not like, oh, you've got OCD, or that's fine, you've got this going on, it's fine. It can target rich businessmen, it can target footballers, anyone. Like, it's not like where it's just you've got it and that's it. I'm sorry, you've had this go wrong, you've had that go wrong, you've got OCD. It can just go after anyone anytime, and you think it's like a genetic component. So there's
yeah,
no shame in that, all right? And when we say bottling it up, we have to be careful how we say this, because if you're on the journey for, like, I don't know, you're 6 months in or a year in, we advise against sort of talking all the time about it, because as you know, it becomes reassurance, it becomes constant getting things off your chest. But if you're at that stage where you haven't yet reached out, which I know many of you are watching this video, right, where you're thinking, do I reach out because I don't really want to face this, or I don't want to admit that I'm dealing with OCD, I don't really want to admit that I'm struggling, that's the first thing for you, right? That's the first thing. Just taking that step, reaching out for help, and go, look, I'm struggling with OCD, and I say this so passionately because in my culture, mental health, and Joe Elliott can relate to it as well, and it's come a long way. It truly has, but it's still sort of looked down upon a bit.
yeah,
It's like, oh, you're dealing with anxiety. Like, just get on with it. Like in the football world, yeah. Again, it has come a long way. It truly has, but it's still like that stigma around it, and it's like, oh, don't say you're suffering, mate. You get on with it. Just have a beer, get on with it, mate. And it's like, well, OCD isn't just have a beer and get on with it. It doesn't work like that. When
no,
you're absolutely panicking that you're going to go to jail for the rest of your life, or you're the worst person on planet Earth, or you're doubting your sexuality, or that maybe you're getting so caught up in compulsions with the cleaning contamination element and so on. So it's just taking that first leap. What do you think about that, Leo?
yeah, absolutely. And I think, a lot of cases, and maybe not just in OCD, a lot of the first step is dealing with the shame. And that actually stops a lot of people from getting
Yeah,
better and taking the right steps. So, yeah, like you say, Sam, there's nothing to be ashamed about in terms of having, a mental health condition. You're just a fallible human on this rocking outer space with a brain and a nervous
yeah,
system that's capable of having it. We have to look at it like that.
yeah.
So, it's up to you. Like, it's either you deal with the shame, or you don't
Yeah.
take the right step forward. And I'd rather, I know what I'd pick
And
out.
and it also goes to, and I struggle with this, and let me know if you did as well, Elliot, because accept and add OCD,
Mm,
right? Accept and add OCD, because, and I learned this, like even like a year into when I was getting help, I still was almost in denial that I'm dealing with mental health disorder, because
yeah,
I got cocky, I got complacent.
yeah,
I thought I could just go back to my old way of thinking. I thought I'd just come in for some calls, get fixed, and go back to how I was.
yeah,
But that's you got to realize that, hey, you've got a serious mental health disorder. You've got
yeah,
a very serious one, right? That can completely debilitate and limit one's life if you're not if you don't get help for it. So I had to understand that, hey, I can still do all the things. I can still socialize. I can still go out and everything. But just knowing that, hey, you're going to have to start shifting beliefs. You're going to have to start cutting these compulsions, because I couldn't just go and live like everybody else. I couldn't just go and have all the same beliefs as everybody else, because OCD would thrive off the irrational thinking and the avoidance behaviors and so on. So understanding and accepting that, hey, I'm dealing with OCD and I need to take this path in my life in order to overcome this. Because
yeah.
otherwise, people just they try and get help and they go, oh, it's not working, and go back to the old way and just never really commit to actually getting help because they're in denial of even having OCD in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, I made a short about this on the channel a few months ago. It's so important that you're living in reality as much as you can, because I didn't live in reality. Like you, Sam, I played off that I had a mental health condition. I thought,
Yeah,
oh, you know what, I get triggered now, then I'm going to be all right. But that really didn't help me to have the acceptance that was required, right? I'd be playing it off, I'd talk the talk, but I wouldn't walk the walk. You know,
Yeah,
I'd pick up the book now and then, like, you know, Last of Life. I'd read it, and he'd be like, "Oh, I need to accept that I have anxiety," and I'd sort of brush over that, thinking, "Oh, yeah, you know what? I'm going to be fine. I don't really need to accept this on a deeper level."
yeah,
Where did it get me? Nowhere. It kept me
yeah,
reading
exactly.
again and again. Like I didn't truly absorb and embody what it said in the book, and I
Yeah,
was in denial because it was so uncomfortable. Right? I didn't want to accept to myself that I had OCD. I wanted to
yeah,
still think I was this normal kid who had nothing wrong with them, but I couldn't. I had to adjust and adapt my
yeah,
mindset to that. You have
yeah,
to live in the now and see what is actually happening right now. If you've got ROCD and you've got no feelings of love or no connection, you need to come to terms with that. If you've got HOCD and you're not feeling levels of attraction to the sex that you want, then you have to come to terms with that. If you've got POCD and you're, you know, having doubts about being sexually attracted to children, you have to sort of absorb that, leave that thing fixed, and use your mind to come to terms with that. Not saying acceptance is agreement by any chance, but we have to, as much as you can, get aligned to your situation right now, because scientifically that's what's happening, and I think that's really
yeah.
important.
Yeah, it's a weird one because, and this is how strange the disorder can be. Because I remember when I actually finally acknowledged that, hey, I need help here.
Yeah.
It was like OCD had gone.
Mm,
This is how weird it was. I don't know if you can relate to that, Elliot, but I reached out for help, and it was like the symptoms had gone.
yeah.
Right? And I remember some of my best days. When I say best days, the symptoms weren't really that severe. Were followed by my horrendous days when I could hardly function. So it's knowing that you can't just wait until a crisis and then reach out for help, and then you have a couple of good days. You're like, "Fuck it, I don't need help anymore." That ain't
No.
gonna work. You're not gonna recover like that because
No.
then you just spend your whole life going from trigger to trigger, crisis to crisis, just getting by, just managing the symptoms, just putting up with it. There's so much more to life than just putting up with OCD. Like you can come out the other end, you can recover from OCD where you've got the absence of guilt and shame, the absence of anxiety and panic, where the intrusive thoughts just lose all intrusiveness. Right. So it's knowing that me and Elliot don't just put up with the symptoms and just get on with it. Right. Once you fully commit to recovery, which is like we just covered, is a hard step, but knowing that, hey, I can not only just put up with this, I can get over this. Right. And I also want to touch on an entitlement issue that I had. It
Mhm.
was like I remember saying this to friends. This was when I was super irrational. I was saying like, "Oh, I shouldn't have to get help. Like, what the hell? Like, who do you think you are? Why shouldn't I have to have OCD?
Yeah.
That's an entitlement thing, ego thing. Like, why should I have to pay for help? Like, why should I have to reach out for help with mental health?" It was, and obviously the culture that I was in, it was because it was deemed as a weakness. It was like, why should I have to go through that? Like,
Yeah.
that's a bit embarrassing. It's a bit humiliating. I have to deal with help. I have to go and get help. I have to go and ask somebody, hey, can you help me mentally?
Yeah.
Right? And that's the kind of beliefs I was holding. Hence, I find it so difficult to reach out.
Yeah, absolutely. It's almost like arrogance, isn't it? It's arrogance to
Yeah.
think that you shouldn't suffer.
Yeah.
Um, it's like with
I
procrastination.
shouldn't have to go through this.
Yeah, it's like with procrastination. It's like arrogance to think you have more time when you don't really have enough time. You don't know when you're going to pass away. You
Yeah.
don't know how much time you have. So it is yeah, exactly. It's an arrogance thing, and we have to deal with that and just, you know, just see where we are now and just be like,
Yeah.
well, why am I exempt from suffering? Why shouldn't I go through it? You
Yeah.
know, there's no universal law, which is, you know, the Albert Ellis teachings, right?
Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah, and you know, when in that regard, when he uses evidence to back up the belief, you don't find evidence for you not suffering. So you have to endure it as you would, as you ought to,
Yeah.
you know, which is so important. Which
Yeah.
again comes with
And it
down.
was like a bitter pill to swallow when I had to reach out for help. That's how it felt. It felt like a sort of swallowing my pride. That's how it felt because I was so rigid around mental health. I was so rigid around reaching out for help, like we've covered in this call.
Yeah,
And yeah, I remember looking at myself in the mirror and going, Sam, do you really want to live a life just going from setback to setback?
yeah,
And I had a partner at the time, and she's still my partner today. And she goes, Sam, hey, you need to reach out. Like, you can't just keep coming in crying and then saying you're going to reach out for help, and then you never do it. Because
yeah,
I was doing that. It took me ages to actually reach out. I could see Rob's page. I was like, this guy knows what he's talking about. But it probably took me, I'd say, 4 or 5 months to actually say, hey, look, I need help. I remember sending him an email, and then he said, hey, yeah, come on in for a session. And then I'd put that for 3 months because it was
yeah,
like, no, I don't really need it.
yeah,
Right.
yeah,
So it was like that bitter pill to swallow that, hey, I need help. But it's the best thing I've ever done. And like
yeah.
you said, time was running out, Elliot. So you got anything to add to that?
Yeah. So I think if I was to go back to the start, yeah, just to add to your point, like I wanted it all gone really quickly. I didn't give it the
Mm.
time that it needed, right? I had to really look at it with a long-term horizon. And it's like, if you're at the start now and you want to be recovered straight away, yes, it's understandable, but what trying to be recovered so quickly is just going to put more pressure onto your already sensitized nerves. So we just have to be realistic, it's going to
I
take,
think seeing it as a journey as well, isn't it?
yeah,
So we're not mechanics. You're not just fixed, are you?
no,
Right? We don't go, right, you come on in for a call, you're fixed, off you go. Next one. You got to see it as a journey, as a process. Hence
yeah,
why we talk about recovery as sobriety,
mhm,
right? We don't get rid of OCD.
no,
There is no cure yet, right? We don't get rid of OCD. So it's knowing that, hey, OCD is here to stay. I can get to a stage where I can't even tell that it's there. Yes, but you're not trying to get rid of it. And that
no,
was another thing I had, just trying to get rid of it. I shouldn't be dealing with OCD. I shouldn't be dealing with mental health. Get rid of it. That's completely the wrong attitude.
yeah, absolutely. And it's like, just an analogy as well. If you're running a business, like the things you learn along the way, say you're running like a multi-million pound business in the end, the things and experiences you learn along the way are more important than that end goal. Yes, you get the money and whatever, but it's the stuff that you learn, the stuff that you adapt to along the way, which is what's really going to set you up for life, not just in OCD,
Mm.
but in life itself, work, relationships, all that other stuff.
Oh,
You learn
yeah.
so much. So it's not just this destination of recovery, it's about what you learn along the journey that you can also apply to your life, right?
Yeah.
And even so, like when you get to recovery, like it's not some happy magical land where everything's good. Like my granddad's just been put in a care home for Alzheimer's. Like I've got a infection in my small intestine right now that I'm dealing with, so I have to cut out loads of things in my diet. So there's all that stuff still going on right now. So it's
Yeah.
not, yes, oh great, it's brilliant.
Yeah.
Sure, I've got a lot more energy and I feel better, but we have to take it off that pedestal and realize that life still goes on around us. I
Yeah.
think
That's
that's
so
another really
important.
important element.
Yeah, it's so important. The unrealistic expectation of what recovery is like.
Yeah.
Like you're not dancing down the street problem free. If anything, when you get to a stage of recovery, there are more problems
Mm.
because you're living life more, aren't you? Right?
Yeah.
You're
Yeah.
facing, you're doing things that you were initially putting off,
Yeah.
right? So you can't expect everything to be pure bliss when you get to recovery. And it's like you're sat there just sort of, loads of dopamine and just, oh, you feel great. It just not doesn't exist, right? You're gonna have to
No.
face problems, but you get very good at dealing with problems because you've
Yeah.
got that robust nature.
Totally
Plus,
different.
if you've overcome OCD, you're going to be in a pretty good place, right?
Yeah.
Because OCD is probably going to be the biggest battle that you're going to face. Let's be honest here. So
Honestly.
it's understanding that, hey, if I come out of that, think of the tools I could learn.
There's so many nice things to it as well, Sam. So like I was at the station the other day, right, and like on the platform, and back when I was in my peak HOCD era, right, I wouldn't know where to look on the platform. I'd be compulsively trying to stare at everyone, right, in case I wasn't doing the exposures right, and I'd be feeling so triggered, like pounding anxiety, right. And then I was at a station the other day, and I was just stood on the platform, completely at peace, like so calm, no like doing silly exposures, trying to look at everybody along the platform, which I used to do, you know.
Yeah,
And like I stood there for a moment and I thought, fucking hell, this is so nice. Like I prayed for these days and they're coming,
yeah,
and I put the work in and now I'm
yeah.
just feel so calm. And like, I have it with my friends as well. We was out the other night and he was like, Elliot, or El, they call me. They was like, El, you just seem so calm. And I was just like, I just
That's
feel
amazing.
sweet. And I
That's
guess you
amazing.
probably had the same as well, Sam.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. But just knowing that's going to take time and patience.
Yeah,
Like
of
you can't
course.
try and forcefully get to that. The,
No.
the, the thing with recovery, when people ask what it's like, it's the energize. It's the getting out of bed and you're plugged in. So you're not just thinking, oh God, I got to work this thing out in the past. You're not just consumed by guilt and shame from the moment you open your eyes. You're focused on what you've got planned that day, whether it's a job, whether it's whether you're going somewhere, whether it's like a life thing, whether it's a relationship thing. You're focused on the day ahead. You haven't got the guilt and shame pulling you back and the anxiety pulling you back and just
No.
constant triggers all day long. And the biggest time that I noticed that today is just sort of how engaged I am with conversations, because I never used to be, but I'd still talk to people, but I was never truly engaged with the conversation.
Mm.
I just sort of ended the conversation very quickly because I wasn't really listening. I felt like I couldn't really get
Yeah.
involved with it because I was, like I say, that distant look, that vacant stare. So
Glass.
now it's like I can have a great deep conversation with somebody and fully, get into it, laugh, humor, all that kind of stuff. So it's that almost that connection comes back, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But don't force that. Don't force feeling present. That just comes back with time and just knowing that you can't force this journey. I've been in over 5 years. And how long have you? When did you first come in?
About 3 years ago now, just under.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And
So
that just shows how long it's going to take. It's not to scare you, but you need a dose of realism. You can't just expect to come in and go, I should be like Simon Elliott. It just doesn't work like that. All right.
No.
It's knowing that it's time and a patience thing. And there's so many bumps on the way, up and downs. There's many false dawns. I think we should do another real talk on that, all the false dawns.
Yeah.
Fuck, I had so many where I felt like I nailed it. I thought I cracked it. And then it was like, no, you haven't. And one of the worst
Yeah.
setbacks ever would follow.
Absolutely. I
So
remember
yeah.
I had that as well. I must have been about a year in, and I was out in Birmingham, in the UK with my friends, and I thought, yeah, I'm recovered, I'm sweet, I feel so good. And then, the next day, bang, like back to where I was, and I thought, fucking hell,
And
right.
it can even feel even worse, can it? Because you've
Yeah.
had like a tease, you've had a tease of getting better, you've had a glimpse of hope, and it's
Yeah.
like get back down, and that's all part of it. It's picking
Yeah.
yourself back up and how quickly you do that.
Yeah, and it's like the leveling up thing that we go on about. It is really like leveling up. When you sort of hit a certain point, yes, you're at a certain level, but the next trigger and the next setback will come, and that'll make you realize where you still need the work. So you actually do
Yeah,
need that along the way, and then you'll get
yeah,
past that, and then the
exactly.
next one, and the next one, and the next one, and until the end, it just fades out, and it's just baseline peace. But yeah,
Yeah.
see the triggers as an opportunity for growth, to see where you're going wrong, deeper levels of acceptance, and see them as an opportunity, which is really
Super important stuff. Elliot, we have to end it there because what I don't want is this video cutting out and it's all chucked in the bin. We don't want that. So
absolutely.
I think it's been a very good real talk. Me and Elliot can relate so much. We're going to do many more of this as well.
Yeah.
So yeah, and if you have found it helpful, please leave a like. If you are interested in one-to-one coaching calls, you have me, Sam, Elliot doing calls, Rob, the founder of OCD Recovery, Nick, Moment, and Gemma, all doing coaching calls. So if you're interested in that, please email phil@ocdrecovery.com and we can get you booked in as soon as we possibly can. Anyway, guys, hope you've enjoyed it. Take care
Cheers.
and
Take
bye-bye.
care. Bye bye.